Jim Cunningham from WQED 89.3 interviewed Barbara Jones, the chief curator of the Westmoreland Museum, where they are hosting the 103rd Associated Artists of Pittsburgh annual exhibition.
Well, let's start right here. One of, I think, the non-traditional approaches is April Frieses, and I hope I'm pronouncing her last name correctly. Is she prints a photogram, and she does it typically with a typical photographic process where she has a light-sensitive paper, photographic paper, and she exposes it to light, and she creates all of these abstract shapes by things that she either cuts out in different black, white, and gray, and she lays them down, and at different exposures it creates these abstract patterns on the photograph. And this is generally a flat, two-dimensional piece. And for every show, she brings it in flat, hangs it so it hangs out all its wrinkles, and then she comes in and sculpts it herself and pins it up. So every time she does this, she can do this many times with the same photograph. She forms it differently. So it becomes a unique sort of installation piece, site-specific, every time she does it. And then she'll hang it out again, and you'll start to see some of that almost pentimenti that is the residue of where she folded it the time before. So you'll get cracks and crevices and creases and things, which is really fascinating. So I think taking a traditional medium and really pushing it into, from traditionally two-dimensional photograph to a three-dimensional. This piece by Seth Clark, he's a fairly recent graduate from Carnegie Mellon. He presented it digitally, and when I saw it, I thought it was a construction of, broken pieces of wood and parts of, they almost look like window pieces and everything, and I really thought it was a three-dimensional construction. And when he brought it in to deliver it, I found out it's a 2D painting. It's actually a diptych. So that's sort of fascinating. It still has the dimensional quality. It looks like somebody balled up, all these houses, potentially, and that had been destroyed, and made them into this shape, and that's what it looks like to me, pieces and parts of slivers of wood and debris. And I think it's sort of a really wonderful sort of contrast between what you see and what the realism of it, that it is two-dimensional when it appears three.
Yeah, I wonder if he was looking at the aftermath of the Johnstown flood.
Well, it almost looks like that. It really does. Where you see all of that debris and everything, how it all forms together to create a ball. And so, with that in mind, I picked this piece, which is a sculpture called Kebabs by Youssef Isham. Oh, sorry, Isham Youssef. Sorry, backward there. But these are pieces of wood that have been skewered as in a kebab, and it is, it's two sculptures. They sit on a pedestal, and they're all used pieces of wood. Some of them look like maybe they've even been burned, and they're some of them look even a little petrified. But it's all used wood, and he's basically skewered them and called them kebabs. So it's kind of a playful, take on what you would see in the natural world. And so comparing those two pieces, where one I thought was three-dimensional, this one is truly three-dimensional. And then there's the paintings that were actually there for me to see, and this is a large diptych, also 2 panels by Scott Hunter. And I just really think that the way that he applies paint, it's very colorful. There's lots of pinks and chartreuse and blues and greens and all of these really great sort of joyful colors. I got that from the painting that I saw in this show, and I was really pleased to see that there's a very strong sort of painterly technique, and it's very abstract, non-objective, but you get a reaction from looking at it, just your reaction to the colors. They sort of speak to you, and it's a really wonderful piece.
Would work in a living room with the right colors.
It would, and then it's next to a photograph by Christopher Ruane, which, it's a very strange sort of composition of a woman who's floated to the ceiling above a fireplace, and it's a bright pink wall, and there's a flag, American flag, leaning in the corner and also on the fireplace. And so the fireplace has been closed up, and it's got on the mantle all these sort of great little tchotchkes, a little ceramic collie, dog, figurines, some pitchers, some crystal vases, some milk glass. So it's a really fun but very unusual composition, and you kind of wonder what was in the artist's mind when he was setting that up.
Yes.
This is a fun piece as well. This is by Rhoda Taylor, and these are coffee filters that were actually used. Now, she manipulated them a little bit by spreading the coffee out onto the filter so it would sort of stain the entire filter, but right out of her coffee maker. And then she embroidered on them on both sides. So they're coffee filter circles, and there's 7 of them strung together, 3 tiers of them, and they hang from a piece of bamboo, so it becomes a kinetic work of art and a wall hanging at the same time. And then this is Sean Quinlan. He is actually he's an editor for a news station and makes quilts, and a lot of his stories come from the news, so you'll see a lot of very sort of political sort of commentary in them. This one obviously has a main image of Judy Garland in The Wizard of Oz, and then superimposed over here is the part of the face of Christ. So there is always a story with his quilts, and he uses a lot of imagery from pop culture, but his technique is just so methodical and detailed that it's really fascinating to look at what he's put together in quilt form. So there's ceramics in the show. This is Chuck Johnson. He is from Erie, and so he's from further away. But his things are very playful. This is a pedestal all made out of unfired ceramic, and it holds an elephant who in turn holds a building on his back. And it's really, I think, this idea of, taking the weight of the world on your shoulders, and but a really sort of playful way to go about it, to get his message across. Brian Pardini, and he has a sculpture called Sweet Face, Spirit of Lake Erie, and in fact this is driftwood that came out of Lake Erie, and he scavenges from Lake Erie, and then he forms them into sculptures, and this, creating this human form, and it's adhered to a piece of stone, so it's a very natural, but it also is just a very beautiful curvilinear form. It doesn't, you don't even have to think of it as a figure, but it sort of is these arms embracing you as you come into the gallery. Mia Tarducci Henry is and I think it's over now, but was the emerging artist at the Pittsburgh Center for the Arts this year. So that's a great honor, I think, for her. But her painting technique is just so alive and vibrant, and this is all turquoise and yellows and greens, and she works, it looks like in layers, and then she scrapes off and she reapplies and she scrapes off, so you really get the idea of the artist's process and the artist's hand, and how she's working. It's totally non-objective, but you could look at it from the distance and just think about the sea and the sky and all of those. It's large as well. It's 84 inches, so it's 7 feet wide, and so it's sort of all-encompassing. You look at it closely, and it's all you see in your peripheral vision. Spindle Man, and he's by a man, Michael Long, who's from Hollidaysburg. And he told me when I saw him in Bedford that he was walking by a furniture store, a long-time furniture store in Bedford, and there was a box of spindles out in front. And he walked in and he said, "Do you have any more of these?" And they said, "Oh," and they took him in the back room, and he bought them all. So Spindle Man sort of sat in a pile in his studio until he was inspired to make a man out of him. So it's all out of chair spindles. People that, Charlene Badula, she went into the Hecla School, and the Hecla School is in ruin, and took these really wonderful photographs. And so we have one of her photographs here, and she's actually on our staff here at the museum, so it's nice to. And I didn't know that was hers, and that was one of the surprises when I juried the show, is when I found out who I'd selected, I was pleased because I didn't know I had selected their work. So.
And what video do we have here?
We have a video here by Kyle Milne, and it's called "I've Gone Too Far to Go Back," 2013. And he was hiking, and it just shows him, the artist, walking through this really wonderful landscape in Colorado. And you just see him walking, and he's walking, and he's walking, and it's very, it's almost meditative, but and he stops along the way to pick something up, and he throws it, and then he keeps walking. But you see this wonderful western landscape unfold behind him and around him. So it is kind of a meditative walk, and you can live vicariously through him.
A vast panorama with a little dot of a person.
Photography. This is Karen Kagan, and two photographs, one called Slag Heap. They're inkjet prints, 52 inches wide, and they're not framed, and just mounted on the wall as simple works on paper and photography. And there's just there's a sense of motion in these. They're black and white, but you get a sense of this slag heap in the background, which is of course really typical of this region, and then kids playing on it. So there's sort of two levels here. There's this motion of these children running across the foreground, and then there's this big sort of slag pile behind, and then the natural landscape behind that. So it's what happens to the slag piles when nature overcomes, but how these kids can enjoy them. Sarika Gulasha is working on panels, 12 by 12 inch panels, and these make up a 6 foot by 6 foot square. So there's 36 of them, and they all are sprayed charcoal on these panels. And she's laid down things on the panels that she has some connection to, a toy, some silverware, a tool, something that then she would spray this charcoal over the top, and it leaves the negative space or the white area where the object was sitting. So nails, wire, all sorts of objects, and a necklace. So then they're put together. They hang about 2 inches apart in this 6 by 6 foot square area. And they're I think it's just a really beautiful formation of individual pieces that sort of all come together as a group. There's a stethoscope as well, scissors. So you can recognize things in these panels. Phil Damianos, who is actually one of our exhibition award winners. We discontinued that while we were out here on our temporary quarters. But this is, Phil is an architect, but he just creates these really wonderful forms out of wood as an artist. Sometimes you'll see him weaving wood. In this case, It's on a gray panel. There's layers of strips of wood that have all been joined together in black, and then in the front are unpainted pieces of wood that lay out in the front, pulled away from the background, so they cast these really wonderful shadows.